Yeah, people were even running, like, hide and seek for the Nahiri nonsense. Just hilarious. So let's go back to the beginning. Friday, I had cold feet about the Jeskai Nahiri. We were going to play Nahiri and a bunch of Emrakuls in the sideboard. Or, excuse me, a bunch of Nahiris and Emrakul. 4 Nahiri, 1 Emrakul was the plan, or at least 3. And I started talking to some friends and some vendors, and like it seemed like everybody was ready for the Nahiri nonsense between Graph Diggers and Pithy Needles and whatnot. Everybody seemed to be ready for it. So we cut it. We added some spice. And yes, we did win with this. We're going to get to that. That's my favorite story about the whole GP. My favorite story. It's also the saddest story, so we'll get into that, or just why I think the Magic community, at least the paper community, could use some change. We'll get into that. Okay, so round 1 was Burn. I'm not going to break down the whole thing, but let's talk about Burn. So I sit down. There was a relatively friendly, he's friendly, older guy. Both of his arms were lined into tattoos, but you know I don't care. I'm going to be friendly with whomever I'm sitting across from. He didn't seem like a really rough guy. He was very friendly, and yeah, we shake hands. Good luck, have fun. We're talking about how our drives were, the usual stuff. Opening hands looked pretty good. I was hoping that he was kind of like Jund. He was not. He was Burn. My hand was not very good against Burn. And thanks for the follow. And basically, I got wrecked game 1. I almost managed to win. So what was weird about this guy, and I quickly realized that he may have been newer to Burn, is I actually bought myself 2 or 3 extra turns where I was already dead by just posturing and making him feel as if I had a counterspell or like a Helix. Like there were a couple times where I like tapped and then untapped mana, and I was like, yeah, am I supposed to? I was like, no, okay, it's your turn, it's your turn, it's your turn. He's like, oh, okay. He had like double lightning bolt for like 2 or 3 turns. He didn't just toast me because he thought I had something I didn't have. Which is so like I kind of realized that he's a little new to the game. I didn't see the brain in a jar engine game 1. Game 2 was drastically different. Game 2, I brought in the 3rd Helix. I brought in the 2 Purges. I brought in the Angers, the Shock, and I brought in Dispel and Negate. And actually, I don't know if it was Game 2. I know it was definitely Game 3. I brought in the Commandeer. So I brought in about this 8 to 9 spells. It was either this 8 or this 9 against Burn. I wasn't interested in these. And I brought out the Boombust, the Cryptics, the Supreme, the Remands. And what else did I bring out? 1 more card. Or 2 more cards. I think I may have even brought down 1 Beck. I think I did. Just because I was like, well, I can tutor forward if I need it when I'm ready to win, but I think I shaved to just 1. Then I brought this in. So we kind of look like this against Burn. And it was much better. I just saw the Helix more. I was like Snapcaster Helixing this guy. It was great. So we kind of look more like this. This is a 0, actually. And that. Yeah, so we look more like this. Actually, I used this as this mode that game. Pretty sure I did. I remember oddsing at one point. I was like, hey, you want to flip a coin? He was like, what? I was like, yeah, I'm going to odds your lightning bolt. Anyway, that was like game 2. Yeah, so game 2 was drastically different. The deck was giving me multiple lightning helixes and snapcasters to flash them back. He didn't know about the Brain in a Jar engine. He hadn't brought anything for artifacts. So after an army of birds, I did do the bet call. After an army of birds and a fistful of cards, I take the game. So that was game 2. Game 3 was fascinating against Burn. Actually, maybe that wasn't in there. No, I commandeered, though. I remember commandeering. What the hell did I take out? Maybe... Oh, game 3, yeah. Game 3... Okay, so game 3, I take out the Brain Engine entirely. And I ended up putting a couple Cryptics back in and something else. I think it was the... Not the Wear Tear. I think I just stuck the Romance... Yep. I put the Romance back in because I had nothing better to be doing. And I actually ended up... You'll see when I talk about it. Okay, so game 3... oh yeah, so game 3, I assumed after you exclaimed, wow, that's pretty busted. This guy was one of the few players in the tournament, which of course maybe again makes me feel like he's maybe newer to the game, or Burn in general. He was one of the only opponents I had that didn't call Judge on me. He was one of like the only people that didn't call me for Judge game 2 when I brain becked. He was like one of the only players the whole tournament. There's maybe a couple others, but they were cool people. Anyway, so yeah, he actually didn't call Judge on me. So yeah, I did the whole fusion thing. Then game 3, he was like, "Wow, that's pretty busted." And so when he said that, I knew he was probably going to be gunning for this card. That's just kind of a tell. And need a swig. And it was pretty interesting, guys. And yeah, so like I knew he was going to bring in like revelries and stuff. So and he did. So I took out the brains, sideboarded some other tools instead. I took the match, never revealing that I actually sideboarded out the brains. I think that would have made him frustrated. I didn't tell him. I didn't have to. And he was like, "Yeah, I brought in like a bunch of revelries. I guess you never drew the brain." That's what he said. He brought in apparently 3 destructive revelries and something else, but there were no brain in a jar in my deck at that point. And I did. Okay, so game 3 against this burn player. This was one of the other cool. There's a way cooler places this card came up. This card is really neat. It's kind of like a really bad Force of Will meets a really bad Misdirection, but we'll get to that. I actually so game 3, he has like an aggressive like Goblin Guide, and for some reason he like bolted me randomly. Pocket Change, thank you for the host, Reno. Appreciate you. That's very generous. Hi guys from Pocket Change. Basically, I actually commandeered his Lightning Bolt and then hit his Goblin Guide with it. And I pitched 2 Remands, which aren't good in the matchup anyway. Yeah, so I pitched a couple Remands to the Commandeer, took control of his Lightning Bolt, killed his Goblin Guide, and then from there I think I top decked a Helix. And then I had like Snapcaster Helix after that, and he was just like, "Oh man, I'm done." And then I like beat him down with the Snapcaster Mage, which is great. But let's unsideboard here. Yeah, so that was burn. That was round 1. And then in the article, I skipped ahead a little bit to... Yeah, so let's skip a couple rounds. Pretty much, most of my matches went beat opponent with doing something busted with the brain, either boom busting, or the bust side of boom bust, like blowing up all their lands, or drawing a whole hell of a lot of cards and making a bunch of 1/1s. Most of my game 1s, if I won it, that's what happened. Either this or this. It was great. These are sideboard... That was sideboard per sideboard. This is sideboard. Okay, sideboard. Sideboard. And main deck. Yeah, so most of my games went that way. I'm not gonna break down every single game. I think that'd be terribly boring. But you guys can read my article when it comes out if you want to read more about the matchups. So let's skip a few rounds and let's skip to. Yeah, and like, yeah, basically the judges at that point were like, "Oh yeah, it's the brain in a jar guy." Like, apparently about after several like judge calls, they were like, "Yeah, like just get on with it." It was hilarious. Like against my opponents, like the judges would be like, "Get on with it." Like, yes, brain in a jar works with these cards. Yes, just play. It was hilarious. Like they were totally the judges after a certain point, totally on my side. Like Vince and the boys, they're like, Sean, just do your thing," and like my opponents are like, "Wait. This works?" It was hilarious. That was probably the funniest thing about the tournament. It was like the judges were like, "We gotta write another time extension." They were like, "Sean, just play." And I was like, "All right, we'll play." It was hilarious. They were all rooting for me too. It was great. And we had like a couple times there were people that were coming by just like to watch my matches. It was great. It was a fun time. And yes, I technically didn't get a deck tech, but I got something better. We'll talk about that. But God, that was like the best part. It was like after a certain point, I like let my opponent know. I was like, you know, like they were like I was like, "All right, I'm gonna cast this, but before you judge call," and they're like, "What?" And I was like, "Before you judge call, just be aware. You know, they all know that this works. You know, I know how it works. I'll be happy to explain it to you." I wasn't being smug about it. I was just trying to speed up the process. But every time they would judge call, and the judge had to give us a time extension, so it was hilarious. But anyways. Judges are awesome, Matsy. Judges are awesome. They're kind people, actually. So I had 2 Tron opponents. The first one I did lose to. The second one I won against, and we'll get into one of these Tron matchups. This is probably the most sour moment of the GP. It's also the most triumphant moment of the GP. So I'm going to kind of slow down the tempo of this part of the story. Okay. So I sit across from a guy. He's kind of got a bit of an interesting... timbre about him, you know, I of course treat him like every other opponent that I have. I shake his hand, say good luck and have fun, you know, and he says the same, and you know, he asks me how long my ride was, and I tell him and ask him, you know, about his, and pretty typical stuff, and we get into it. Game 1, I have a natural draw of double boom bust and a Snapcaster Mage. And he's playing Tron, and every time I aim the boom at whatever land that he searched up with either the Expedition map or the Sylvan Scrying, I think I counted a Sylvan Scrying, and then I boom busted the lands he was searching for. So he was a little upset game 1, I can understand that. That's understandable. And maybe that's where this came from. I'm hoping that's the case. Otherwise, maybe just a really mean person. I don't know. But so basically, I'll tell you what happened. So game 1, yeah. So I went boom, boom with a fetch land, boom with a ghost quarter, snapcaster, boom. And then I beat him down with a snapcaster and some burn spells. So I actually didn't do any. I didn't draw a single brain in the jar. Game 1 against this Tron player. I just blew up some of his lands, and he was like, "Wow, main deck boom bust." I was like, "Yep." I don't want him to know that I'm running brain. And so game 2, I actually left in the brain. What I brought in was the commandeer. I took out a lot of my burn. I don't remember how much. So let me try to remember how I sideboarded. Let's see if I can. Brought in the negate, of course. I brought out the odds in the Nahiri. In the... Did I bring in any relics? I don't remember if I did. I don't think I did. Oh, Weretur came in. That's 4 more. I either brought in some burn or I brought in the other walkers. Maybe the Jace. Verdict came out, I think. Tamio, maybe. I think Electrolyze stayed. Okay, so maybe just some maybe like a 2-1 split. And the reason you do the split in this deck is you can tutor for the Helix, which does come up, but maybe I just ran 3 bolts, I can't recall. Something like that. Either that or maybe this configuration. So we look kind of like this against him at this point. Okay, so I left in the brain engine because he didn't see it game 1, which is fine. And then this is where I get a judge call. So I set up the boom bust brain against this Tron player, and understandably he calls a judge. And I was like, that's understandable. That's not what I'm upset about. If he's here listening tonight, and you might know who you are, that's not why I'm upset about you, friend. I'm not. That's not, and I can say friend at the end because at the end, he and I became fast friends. If there's anything I'm upset about, it's the way that you said it. And everybody else around the table heard you say it. And I wrote about it in my article because I think that that's a prime example of kind of what made me not really enjoy myself at the GP. Kind of the attitude. All right, so I'm gonna basically quote this person. And it's not a pretty side of the Magic community, and it's kind of what I'm writing about in my article. He said to my face, we had eye contact, and I said, okay, I would like to brain in a jar, boom bust. I had two counters on the boom bust, and I busted. And I was going to pick up all my lands, and I was like, your lands are gonna blow up too. And he's looking at the brain, he's looking at the bust, and he's like. He doesn't just go, judge, like that was the normal thing people were doing, like, judge, that's fine. That's perfectly fine, I know how the deck works, I'm happy to explain it. The judges are happy to do the same thing. That's fine. That's not what upset me about this. He looks me in the eye sockets, okay? He looks me in the eyes. So I'm going to get a little close to the cam here. He looks me in the eyes, guys, and he says, I know that this works perfectly fine. I'm going to call a judge on you anyways. I was like, whoa. I didn't say anything. At that point, I was just like, oh, okay, that's, you're welcome to call a judge. That's fine. But, like, seriously? What does that say about Magic? Jesus. Like, God. Anyway, so, yeah, the judge comes by, and this is where my heart just sinks. He says, the judge that comes to our table is one of the few judges that doesn't know how Brain in a Jar works with Boom Bust. One of the few. And so I'm in some trouble. I need some help. So the judge is like, no, there's no way that this works. Bust is CMC 6. Brain in a Jar, you've only have two charge counters. There's no way that this works. And I kindly said, I'm like, my heart starts pumping, and I'm like, oh man. And I tell the judge, I say, okay, I believe that this works though the way that I have cast it here. I would please like to appeal. And he said, that's fine. You're welcome to appeal. So he goes and he gets one of the maroon-shirted higher-up judges. And that judge is very kind with me, shakes my hand, and is like, okay, so what's going on here? So we've got a brain and a boom bust, and you're saying you want to cast the bust side? And I said, yes. And he's like, no, I don't think it works that way. The higher-up judge, this is one of the head judges, I guess, because he was in the maroon shirt, and then my heart sinks. My heart just sinks here. Like, because my Tron opponent, he said he knows that this works, yet he has still tried to throw me under the bus and has asked for a judge call, not because he doesn't know how this works, but because he's trying to win the match off a technicality of the judges not knowing that it works. And so at this point, my heart sinks, and I take a deep breath. I take a deep breath. And I'm like, tournament's on the line here, guys. My tournament is on the line. Our tournament. Our hopes and dreams are on the line here. This has a beautiful finish, though, so don't worry.